How to negotiate lease renewal for a business? We're going to answer that question in this video. Okay, if we're talking about renewing leases, that means that you already had a lease in place. But we're going to talk about both. If you haven't had a lease in place, just in case, we're going to give you some pointers on that. And also, if you're going to be in the stages of renewing your lease, maybe some pointers on what you can do to help give you an advantage in your lease renewal for your business with your landlord. Okay, so let's start first with actually negotiating your first lease. If you've never negotiated a lease before, it's important that you know what type of landlord that you're working with. There's landlords that are single member, single owner type landlords where they're an owner operator, it's one person, or husband and wife that run, say, the strip center, the shopping center, whatever it is. There's also individuals that put together an LLC, so there's maybe 5 partners or something to that extent, so you might be answering to a group when you deal with your landlord. And then there's actually landlords that are multi-company landlords where you have, I've had leases in the past where it was like 30 LLCs made up this one gigantic shopping center. And so in order to get anything done, it just took weeks. So understanding what type of landlord that you're going to get into business with is very important. And the reason I say that is in business, in life, communication is everything. It is vital to doing business. And if you can't quickly communicate with your landlord, sometimes it's going to pose problems for your business. I mean, things do come up, right? Things that you don't expect. There's situations that come up, and you want to be able to be transparent. Like I always say with the banks, you want to be transparent with your landlords. You want your landlord to know what's going on, and you want to have the ability to either deal with them directly through email or through phone or whatever the best form of communication is. You want to be able to deal with those people directly. So when you're getting ready to negotiate the terms of your lease, once you've figured out what type of landlord that you have and you're okay with it, I personally prefer like the quote unquote mom and pops type of landlords because those are the easiest to actually communicate with and work with. So once you figure that out you need to write down on a piece of paper every single thing that is what I call a deal killer for you. Meaning if the landlord doesn't give you that or those terms in your lease agreement, you're not going to do the deal. They're like that bad. And just as an example, we'll just make an extreme one. You know, you want to open up a restaurant and they tell you, you can't sell hamburgers. Well, geez, that's going to be maybe like one of your top 3 items and they're not going to let you sell hamburgers for whatever reason. I mean, that's stupid, but you know, weird stuff does happen. Maybe they have like some kind of exclusivity with another, you know, fast food joint or something like that where they're the owner of that property and within a 1-mile radius or 5-mile radius, they can't let any other hamburger dealers or hamburger restaurants be in. So that might conflict. So you need to put down all the things on a piece of paper that are deal killers for you. They would kill the deal. The other things you got to put down is kind of the intermediate, the stuff that you'd like to ask for. Maybe like the dream column, like I would like to get 3 months of free rent. When you're negotiating your initial lease, depending on how many vacant spots are in the shopping center, the strip center that you're trying to lease out of, that sometimes will dictate how much leverage you have, how much power you have to negotiate. Because if a place has been vacant for a while, that probably gives you a stronger ability to get some free months of rent. And the reason landlords do that is they want you to get set up. And they know that, like when you're doing your build out and you're setting up your business, in most cases, you're not even open yet. So it's kind of tough to charge for rent. So depending on the landlord, the amount of vacancies there are, things like that. There's a lot of different variables. You might ask for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months rent, but you know, ask for 3 or 4 months. You know, there's been times where we've asked for 6 months of free rent, but we also were going to guarantee the landlord in that particular case 5 years of rent. So they knew that by investing into us, if they were going to give us, say, 6 months, which I can't tell you how many exactly each one gave us because we're bound by confidentiality, but I can just tell you that in those particular cases, they can range from no free rent to some free rent, depending on, you know, obviously the landlord. So put down, you know, call it your dream column or your wish column, your wish list, so to speak, of the things you really would like to get done. It's really going to help you out a lot, you know, in the long run. And then there's things they call like tenant improvements. These are the costs that you're going to spend with, you know, with building out your space. So if you have a restaurant or any type of business, you're going to set up your counters and your chairs and your desks, and you're going to paint the walls, and you might have to get city approval to put up new walls and things like that. So if you get to the point where you're actually doing the build out and you've got, say, $75,000 worth of build out from your contractor or $100,000 worth of build out, sometimes depending on the length of the lease agreement, you might be able to actually go to the landlord and ask for some of that as part of the lease agreement. And, if you're spending a lot of money, I'll just make an example. Let's say your rent's going to be $3,000 a month, and you've decided I'm going to be there for at least 5 years. So you're going to set up and you're going to say, now wait a second. I'm going to pay this landlord $3,000 a month for 5 years. So that's $36,000 a year times 5, right? So it's about $180,000 a year, or $180,000 over the course of the lease agreement. Maybe that landlord will give you 10% of that or 20% of that in improvements as like a budget to help you do your tenant finish. So if you actually went the route to get like an SBA loan or a loan, this will reduce the amount of money that you have to actually use from your loan money, right? And you don't have to pay out of pocket in a sense, and the landlord's going to help you basically supplement, your tenant improvements. That's very, very important. So another extremely important thing to know when you're negotiating your lease, and we're on the concept here in this video talking about lease renewal. So some of you might have made this mistake and might not have done this, and you're learning your lesson right now. So if this is actually the first time you're going to sign a lease, listen closely. Try to project the possibilities of how long you're going to be in business. If you think that your business, if you know that you and your significant other or your family or yourself and your team are going to stay in this business long term, then try to project and set up a lease that has a guaranteed amount of time. Say like 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, and then build in options to renew. So options to renew your lease are huge, and I'll tell you why. Landlords are smart, and if you get established and you have a really good business, landlords will notice, oh my gosh, whatever. In some cases, they might even try to slip into your lease agreements where they want to get a percentage, they call it percentage of sale rent, percentage rent, meaning like they look at your sales. You have to turn in your sales every year, and you say, hey, whatever your total sales are, you have to pay additional money to the landlord as additional rent based off of your sales. I personally never accept that. That's a deal killer for me. I'm not going to give the landlord, like let's say my business does $500,000 in sales, and he puts in like a 2% additional rent provision based off my sales. Well, 2% of $500,000 is $10,000. So at the end of the year, you're going to have to write this landlord a check for 10 grand, or maybe he wants it monthly and you have to pay him, $850 a month or whatever it breaks down to. Why would you do that? Just say no. I want to know where my rent is. I'm drawing the line. This is all that I'm going to pay you, and that's it. But going back to the lease renewal options, understanding how long you're going to be in business can help you architect it. So you can say, if you really feel confident that this is going to be what you're going to be doing for a long time, you might want to sign and go to the landlord and say, I want to sign a 5-year lease. If you're comfortable, you're well-funded, you're confident, you're business savvy. And the reason I say that is when you're willing to guarantee a 5-year lease, landlords get excited because 5 years is a long time. That's usually what they try to get minimum, but in a lot of cases you can get a 3-year lease. And desperate landlords will take whatever. Maybe they'll do a 1 year or 2 year lease, but usually it's 3 minimum, but a 5-year they like. Well, if you're going to guarantee 5 years, it's standard to ask for up to 5 years in renewals. Now, what you can do is you can break it up however you want to. You can say, hey, Mr. Landlord, Mrs. Landlord, I'm going to give you a 5-year guarantee. Plus, I want to have 5 options to renew this lease agreement for 1 year at a time. So you're going to have 5 options. Well, what landlords are going to want is they're going to want you to give them notice. So they're going to say, okay, 6 months or 9 months before the end of the current lease term, you have to give me notice and let me know whether or not you elect or don't elect to renew and exercise your option to renew your lease under the terms of whatever you set up. Most landlords don't want to, do 1 year and renew, 1 year and renew. If you do like a 5-year, a lot of them will say, hey, I'll let you have an option, but it's a one-time option for an additional 5 years. The reason that's not the end of the world, the reason it's not bad, is because if you actually do that, you're basically locking that space for 10 years, but you're only obligated to pay for the first 5. So it kind of lets you kind of peek and see, okay, how is my business doing? And so you're into year 2, 3, now you're into year 4, and you've really built your business up, and that location is doing really well, and you're like, wow, I'm not going anywhere. I built up such a customer base. Well, the good news for you is you thought way in advance, right? So you plan this. It's just like pilots do. You planned your landing well in advance before you just got over the runway and you're like, oh crap, I got to land this plane. You don't ever want to do that. So plan your landing, plan your lease renewals with your landlords. You can always ask for more, right? So you can say, I'm going to do a 5-year guarantee and I want 7 years in options or 10 years in lease renewal options. Most of the time they're going to tell you no. Most of the time they're willing to give you the same amount of time that you're going to guarantee. But here's the catch. When you do your lease renewal options, they're going to want more money per square foot. And the common area maintenance charges, also known as CAM, C-A-M, those charges are going to go up over time. So the landlord might charge you for those. So there's things that landlords have to pay for out of pocket. It's their personal property taxes, the insurance on the property, the maintenance, they call it common area maintenance, and they usually bill that to the tenants in their shopping centers, in their strip centers. And so because of that, you have to understand that even though you're going to negotiate, the renewal options, that could be variable in the future depending on the landlord. Me personally, I try to just I do my best to get just flat rate rent no matter what. That's what I shoot for. So I know exactly what I'm signing up for. There aren't these factors outside of my control. If the government raises the taxes on the landlord's property, well, geez, he's just going to bill me, right? So what's his incentive to try to get a reduction on his taxes on his property? He's just going to bill the tenants. Well, if you actually say, nope, I'm paying a flat rate. So let's say our example of paying $3,000 a month in rent for your business, he or she might say when you renew, hey, wait a second. If you're going to renew for 5 years, I'm going to want $3,500 a month, or I want $4,000 a month, or I want $5,000 a month, something. And that's where you got to negotiate. See, this is the time to negotiate with the landlord is really before you do anything, right before you go into his center. Because once you're in there and you're all set up, they know that you're set up. You don't have as much leverage, right? And then the farther out you are, like I've had situations with landlords where I didn't have a lease renewal. Well, I had it, but it was getting ready to expire, right? I was in my term and it was like 2 or 3 years out from expiring. And I called the landlord. I said, hey, I want to start negotiating to get an option. And the reason I do that is because let's say I waited right up until like 3 months before, 2 months before my lease was going to end. Well, the landlord knows I'm under the gun. I'm like really desperate potentially, and he might be able to really use that as leverage to charge me more rent. And I don't want that. So I got to make sure I keep all my options open, let him know that I'm not desperate. We're 2 years or 3 years away. We're good. We've already negotiated and things like that. So go through all of your lease items that they're going to send you a lease that you got to look over. And I highly recommend getting a good attorney to help you review those lease agreements, because sometimes some landlords put things in there that are deal killers. You got to strike those things out. And when you send your comments back to the landlord, say, nope, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. But when you have legal representation, you literally have a professional in your corner, and that's what you want. You want somebody that's looking at documents every day, that sees lease agreements every day. That's their job. So while it's maybe your job is, cooking for your restaurant or setting up your businesses, or you're business savvy, maybe you're not the most business savvy in negotiating legal agreements, right? Loan documents or lease agreements, things like this. So how do you negotiate a lease renewal? There's so many different ways to do it, but I hope explaining all the things you can do in advance in this video so far kind of gives you some ideas on what you need to do. Start planning your lease renewal as early as you can. And if you don't have an option, try to get that option. What they'll do is they'll just create a separate document. They'll call it like lease addendum, an addendum to the lease agreement dated this date, whatever. It'll just be an addendum. It'll be a 2, 3, 5-page document, very short, that just affirms the existing lease, extends the date, puts the new rent rates, the new, like we said, common area maintenance and taxes and insurance, whatever, these kind of things. And always do your best to give yourself as many possibilities as you can in your lease agreements. It's only going to help you in the future. So I hope you found this video very helpful. If you liked it, please subscribe. Click the subscribe button below. I'm going to do my best to keep delivering. And remember to push through and be the hustler.